Just after New Year's in 1981, a young woman named Tracey was set to celebrate her 21st birthday. Back in 81, the legal drinking age in the United States was 18, so 21 was not as much the milestone birthday that it is today. Instead of a big night out on the town, Tracey was going to have lunch with a friend and then have a quiet romantic dinner in with her husband. But instead of greeting his bride on her birthday when he arrived home, Tracey's husband would be plunged into a nightmare, finding his wife's lifeless body on their bed. Decades have passed without any answers, but a few unique clues could hold the key to solving this case. My name is Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time means a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved murder of Tracey Neilson. Tracey Neilson was born Tracey Diane Waterfield on January 5, 1960, to parents Jim and Sandy. Tracey was the middle of three siblings. She had an older brother, Ricky, and a younger sister, Cindy. She grew up in the town of Canadian, Texas, where her family owned a cattle ranch and was involved in the local First United Methodist Church. And when I say involved, I mean her dad was part of everything. Sunday school teacher, board chairman, finance chairman, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Her family had a large presence in the local area. Canadian is on the eastern side of the Texas Panhandle, close to the border with Oklahoma. In the most recent census, the population was only around 2,300 people, so it was likely even smaller when Tracey was growing up there. Tracey was a beautiful young woman, but those closest to her said she was the type that didn't realize she was that pretty and was just a very humble spirit. Having said that, she was not shy. She was friendly with everyone and very popular and well-liked. At Canadian High School, Tracey was a star athlete in basketball, tennis, and cheerleading. And she managed to do all of that on top of being a great student as well. Tracey graduated second in her class and had big dreams for the future. Tracey's father had attended Oklahoma State University, and she was really close to him and wanted to follow in his footsteps. So for her freshman year, that's where she was headed off to. Oklahoma State University was 3 hours north of Canadian, Texas, in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Tracey wanted to become a physical therapist and specialize in working with people with disabilities. As soon as Tracey got to college, she fit right in, joining a sorority and making new friends. She was successful in her studies there and got involved in a lot of the campus life and culture. It was there in her freshman year that she met a handsome pre-med student by the name of Jeffrey Neilson. She fell for him quickly, and he felt the same way, telling others how lucky he felt to have Tracey as his girlfriend. The pair began dating and got engaged over winter break when Tracey was a sophomore and Jeffrey was a senior. They were married that same summer on July 26, 1980, in Tracey's hometown of Canadian. The two blended and represented their dual faith backgrounds in the ceremony, with a Catholic priest and a Methodist pastor acting as the two clergymen to officiate and bless the new marriage. Tracey's best friend and her sister were interviewed on the podcast Dealing Justice, and they recalled the beautiful ceremony and how Tracey had a huge wedding party. I want to say it was like 8 bridesmaids, so Tracey had a big friendship circle. After the wedding, the couple honeymooned in Colorado Springs. But after the honeymoon, they had some big changes coming. Jeffrey was set to begin medical school at University of Oklahoma, and Tracey wanted to be with him, so she transferred as a third-year student over there to be with him and continue on with her studies. People who live in Oklahoma probably have this distinction down, but I looked it up to have a better sense. So they started out at Oklahoma State and then moved down to University of Oklahoma. University of Oklahoma is about 85 miles south of Oklahoma State and is located in Norman, Oklahoma. The couple then settled into an apartment in the city of Moore, a few miles away from campus. The fall semester started, and the two were busy but absolutely loving doing life together. Tracey was her usual bubbly, friendly self, and she made tons of new friends. And she wasn't so far away from her old campus that she couldn't keep in touch with her old sorority sisters and her friends there. The semester ended, and they headed off into the holiday break, which just a year prior had been what they had gotten engaged over. Monday, January 6th, 1981, was Tracey's birthday. It was also Jeffrey's first day back from the holiday break. As the two did their morning routine before Jeffrey headed out the door, they talked about the day ahead, but nothing about that day would go according to plan, and little did Jeffrey know that this would be the last time he'd ever see his wife alive again. On that morning, Jeffrey had to get to med school, and he planned to be there until around 4 p.m. Tracey let him know that she planned to run some errands that morning, including picking up some ingredients for a nice, elegant dinner in that evening. Rather than go out to a restaurant, the two are going to have an intimate dinner in. She also said she was going to be meeting a sorority sister for lunch that day. And just to give her a name for this episode, we'll call her Lindsay. Jeffrey said goodbye to his wife, gave her a kiss, and off he went. Tracey spoke on the phone to family and friends that morning, who called to wish her a happy birthday. She was then seen out grocery shopping at the local supermarket. Neighbors reported seeing her return sometime late morning before noon. As family and friends tried calling her that afternoon, their calls were not answered. Jeffrey Neilson got out of class as planned around 4, but he had an important errand to run on the way home. Clearly fitting into his new role as husband, he was fitting the stereotype of husband who needed to buy his wife her birthday present on the day of her birthday. He was a busy med school student, so we'll cut him some slack. Tracey had a perfume she really liked, so he stopped in Oklahoma City to go to a perfume counter at an upscale department store. Gift in hand, he arrived home around 5 p.m. When he pulled up to his duplex, he noticed the door was unlocked. Just as a side note, I'll have a picture of this apartment complex, the Google Street View of it, on our Instagram at SimplerTimeCrimePod. So the door being unlocked wasn't all that surprising to him because Tracey grew up in a very small town and didn't always keep things locked. She was just used to living in a safe and secure community, and Moore didn't have an unsafe reputation itself. He walked inside and noticed that Tracey had been doing some ironing. There was a shirt set up on the ironing board, and the TV was on, so she was multitasking, which, big same over here. If I'm doing laundry or dishes, I'm watching something on TV or listening to a podcast. He called out Tracey's name, and he didn't get a response, so he continued on and noticed on the kitchen counter there were 2 lobster tails. Again, other than not seeing his wife, he was just taking in the moment and noticing, okay, she had picked up what she said she was going to pick up. She obviously wants lobster for dinner, but it was still odd that she wasn't greeting him. So he called out her name again, no answer, and then he walked back to the master bedroom and was met with a horrifying scene. There on the bed lay Tracey. She was covered in blood and had visible upper body wounds. Jeffrey could barely process what was in front of him. He began screaming and ran out of the apartment. He knew the couple who owned the apartment complex well, so he ran straight to their door and knocked on it for them to call 911. And after that moment, Jeffrey never would go into his home again. When investigators arrived at the scene, they were both disturbed and puzzled. Tracey had been stabbed over 20 times in her chest, and her throat had been slit. She had on a pair of blue jeans and a flannel shirt. There were no signs of sexual assault and nothing that was missing from the home that they could tell. So right off the bat, robbery and sexual assault did not appear to be the motive on the surface. There was also no signs of forced entry. Police did the usual. This must have been a person who was known to Tracey who she let in. And if you listen to my podcast often, you know this is one of my pet peeves. While murder victims are more commonly killed by someone they know than strangers, police also underestimate how often people will open a door to be polite and assume good intentions of the person on the other side. Tracey's family and friends thought alongside the same train of thought as me, and even said she may not have had the door locked to begin with. They said that if someone knocked and said they needed help or to use the phone, she absolutely would have let them in. She was just used to her small town, southern hospitality in Canadian Texas. This very much complicated things because essentially the suspect pool could be endless. Another thing of note at the crime scene was that there was no signs of a struggle. So one could deduce that either Tracey was immediately overpowered upon the person entering her apartment, or her guard was down enough that she got all the way back to her bedroom area with this person behind her and then was attacked in the area her body was found. Police canvassed the neighborhood, and despite this being midday on a weekday, she had a lot of people in the neighborhood who were home. Her neighbors did not hear any signs of a fight or screaming or anything that would alert them to something being amiss. However, neighbors did report seeing a strange man lingering in the neighborhood that day who was unfamiliar to them. One neighbor even said they saw a man entering Tracey's apartment on the afternoon of her murder around noon. According to a January 8th article in the Abilene Reporter News, neighbors told police a dark-haired younger man was seen entering the woman's apartment around noon Monday. The witnesses reportedly told police the man may have forced his way into the apartment when she opened the door. It's unclear to me if any kind of movement was done that would lead them to believe that, or if that's just the neighbors' speculation. Composite sketch artists drew up 2 possible people in the neighborhood witnesses saw that day in hopes that someone would recognize them and bring them in for questioning. But you guys, as usual, these composite sketches were so bad. The most generic white dude composite sketches you'll ever see. I'll have a copy on the Instagram, but don't hold your breath. I don't think these are going to be the key to identifying the perpetrator. The pathologist who examined Tracey's body determined that she had died sometime around noon that day or a little after. It was confirmed that she had not been sexually assaulted. The kitchen knives from the apartment were sent off for testing. After this was done, investigators shared that they knew the type of knife that was used in the commission of the murder. They also said they did not have possession of that murder weapon, and that it was not one of the knives from inside the house. In establishing a timeline, the last person who they confirmed was able to reach Tracey by phone that day was a family member calling at 10 a.m. to wish her a happy birthday. Neighbors saw her return to the home shortly before noon to unload groceries, and then anybody who called her after noon that day was unable to reach her. So what about that friend, the sorority sister who we're calling Lindsay, that she was supposed to have lunch with? Well, she apparently had to cancel the lunch date last minute. More on her a bit later, though. Oklahoma law enforcement realized they were in trouble, and they quickly formed a task force. The task force was comprised of 8 full-time detectives, 4 from the Moore Police Department, and 4 agents from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, or OSBI. They also had 1 lab tech. Lacking any discernible motive, this murder seemed random and senseless, and the lack of direction and evidence was making the crime hard to solve. I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in this week. I am an independent podcaster who researches, writes, interviews, records, edits, and promotes as a one-woman show. My friend Ilsa recently joined me and is helping me with researching some of the cases with less publicly available information. So huge shout out and thank you to her. and I have a goal this year to connect with more families who want me to share their loved ones' cases. I specialize in covering unsolved cases that are over 20 years old. Each episode, I revisit what's been found, what actionable items can still be done, and discuss how the case was shaped by the time and history that it occurred. So if you have a case recommendation or want me to cover your loved one's case, reach out to me at simplertimecrimepod@gmail.com. If you're hoping to support the show, please leave a 5-star review, recommend it to friends, recommend it on social media, on Reddit, you name it, and follow me on your preferred listening platform. Each bit of support helps, and I can't thank you enough. Now, back to the show. By January 9th, a local paper discussed the possibility of Tracey's death being connected to a murder that occurred in Amarillo, Texas, 9 months earlier. Amarillo is 3 hours and 45 minutes away by car from Moore, so this was not exactly a slam dunk. But in April of 1980, a woman named Sherry Lynn Welch was closing up a boutique furniture store in Amarillo. There were signs based on where her shop keys were found and how the store doors were found that she had locked up at 5:30 p.m. closing time per her usual routine. It's unclear whether the killer knocked at the door and she opened it to tell him that the store was closed and he then forced his way in, or if he hid out in the store waiting for her to close, which, let's be honest, that's straight out of a nightmare. Either way, the killer viciously stabbed the store worker to death around 30 times. Because of the similarities in violence and the knife wounds, some wondered if the two cases were connected. However, in the end, they wouldn't be. Prior to Sherry's murder in 1980, a housewife was also murdered in 1979. Her name was Sarah Lawrence, and she was stabbed and sexually assaulted in her home. Like Sherry, she had been stabbed around 30 times with a large knife. Unlike Sherry and Tracey, she had been sexually assaulted and posed in a way that made that obvious. There were bloody handprints and footprints left at the scene, and a path out of the house and a trail of bloody footprints led to the door of a teenager whom police were familiar with as a burglar and prowler. Despite the evidence pointing in his direction, long story short, there was some mishandling of the investigation, and he wasn't charged with the crime in any sort of timely fashion. As a result, he was free when Sherry was attacked at the furniture store. He was finally re-questioned for Sarah Lawrence's murder when a handprint from Sherry's scene matched Sarah's scene. The man, Jay Pinkerton, was arrested and charged with Sarah Lawrence's 1979 murder in September of 1980. He would not be charged in Sherry Welch's murder for another 11 months. So at the time of Tracey Neilson's murder in January of 1981, nobody had been arrested for Sherry's murder, and thus there was still that room for speculation. But being that he was in jail at the time, it was impossible for Pinkerton to be Tracey's killer, and thus her case was not related to the other two. As a side note, Pinkerton was found guilty and was the youngest man to be executed by the state of Texas at just age 24 in 1986. Moving on from that lead, there weren't any other similar cases to tie to the brutal stabbing that took place in Apartment C on that January day in 1981. Just weeks after Tracey's murder, friends and family pulled together a $10,000 reward for information, and a couple of banks in Canadian Texas put up an additional $12,000, bringing the total reward to $22,000. Despite this large sum of money, no substantial clues emerged. Shortly thereafter, the reward was raised to $35,000. Fearing that those holding information would just wait for the reward to continue growing before coming forward, Tracey's parents, Jim and Sandy Waterfield, publicly announced that the reward would be capped at $35,000. But still, there were no leads. With no direction to go, the case went cold. In 1983, Henry Lee Lucas was slated to be questioned in her case. Henry Lee Lucas was an American serial killer who sometimes murdered with an accomplice, a man named Otis Toole. Otis was identified as the murderer of 6-year-old Adam Walsh. One thing Henry Lee Lucas was known for was embellishing on how many murders he committed, across how many states, and while his actual victim count is unknown, it's suspected that he confessed to many killings that he did not in fact commit. Sometimes it was to play mind games with the detectives, and sometimes it got him special privileges, like time outside of prison to drive to a crime scene, or things like coffee and cigarettes to talk to detectives. It seems as though Henry Lee Lucas was not a viable suspect, as nothing more came of this. Another person police had to look into was the sorority sister, who we're calling Lindsay. Now, the information I'm getting about this angle is strictly from the Dealing Justice podcast, because nowhere else is this really captured. But on Dealing Justice, Tracey's best friend was interviewed and talked about some oddities around Lindsay. She talked about how at times Tracey's extroversion and ability to connect with people would get the best of her, and she would just want to kind of duck away quietly and be a bookworm. But Tracey truly had this sort of magnetic presence about her, and that sorority sister Lindsay was seemingly kind of obsessed with Tracey. She called Tracey constantly and would be always pressuring her to hang out. She'd get jealous of Tracey having other friendships. Tracey tried to keep healthy boundaries with her while still maintaining their friendship. They were in the same sorority, and she didn't want to exclude Lindsay from things. Then one day, when it was Tracey's bridal shower, Lindsay was very offended. Apparently, it was on Lindsay's birthday, and she felt it was very selfish of Tracey to overshadow her big day and not think of her. And Lindsay was telling anybody who would listen how upset she was. It seems like Tracey just sort of waited for this to blow over, and Lindsay must have somewhat gotten past it because Lindsay was who Tracey agreed to go to the birthday lunch with that day. The details around Lindsay's bizarre last-minute cancellation that day are hazy and not well documented. We don't know if Lindsay was supposed to pick Tracey up at her apartment that day, and we don't know if she actually got a hold of Tracey to cancel. And her story to different people in their circle seemed to change frequently. To one person, she said she canceled. To another, she said she was out running errands and just lost track of time. And to another, she said her car had broken down. Given her obsessive nature and the fact that Tracey had been viciously stabbed but not sexually assaulted, made people around Lindsay skeptical of her possible involvement in Tracey's murder. They also couldn't help but notice that the previous feud revolved around Tracey overshadowing Lindsay, with her bridal shower being held on Lindsay's birthday. Could this conflict have resurfaced on this day and led to a confrontation? Tracey was apparently interviewed by police, but on the advice of her attorney, she refused to take a polygraph test. That's pretty common. You'll never find any attorney who tells you to take a polygraph, so that's not necessarily a sign of guilt. I couldn't find anything that officially cleared her, but she isn't named as a suspect either. I should add, in terms of clearing suspects, Jeffrey Neilson was cleared very early on and is not considered a suspect at all. The next time Tracey's name would be in the news would be tied to a piece of evidence that OSBI shared for the first time with the media. In the late 80s, the OSBI petitioned for the state of Oklahoma to grant funding for a computerized fingerprinting system. At the time, all fingerprints were on a individualized fingerprint card, and humans had to manually compare. It could take months, if not years, to compare fingerprints and look for a match, especially if there were no suspects to compare it to. So, for example, if you had a fingerprint at a crime scene and you thought suspect John Smith committed the crime, it was somewhat easy to compare John Smith's fingerprint to whatever was left at the scene. But if you have just the fingerprint left at the scene and nobody to compare it to, you're left with comparing it to all of them that are in your system. A daunting task. OSBI had heard of digitized fingerprint technology being helpful in other states, and that the automation of such a thing could compare fingerprints in a matter of hours to just days. Tracey's name came up because her in-laws, Jeffrey's parents, were petitioning hard for this technology. And for the first time, the public heard that there was a latent fingerprint left behind in Tracey's case that had unsuccessfully been manually compared to hundreds of other prints without success. In May of 1990, the goal was accomplished and OSBI got their first computerized fingerprint system. Tracey's friends and family held out hope that this technology would match the print, but their hope was deflated when there was no match. Despite this not being a success in Tracey's case, the establishment of this did help solve hundreds of cases in Oklahoma. In 1999, the Integrated Automated Fingerprint Information System, or AFIS, was established as the nationwide database for fingerprint comparison. And still, the fingerprint in Tracey's case was not matched to anybody in the system nationwide. After this, Tracey's case would not come up in the news again until January of 2015, on the 34th anniversary of her murder. And this time, police had new evidence. On January 5, 2015, the OSBI director, Stan Florence, held a press conference where he shared a piece of evidence that had previously been withheld from the public. Due to a confidentiality law, they had previously been unable to share it, but an amendment to that law in 2011 created the space for them to now share it. Why they waited it until 2015 to do so, you've got me there, but it is what it is. Since day one, investigators had in their possession a cable trouble ticket book. It was found in or around Tracey's apartment, depending on what source you read it from. The ticket lists Tracey's apartment as having work done at 11:51 a.m. on the day of her murder. Remember, her time of death was placed at around noon that day. There is some other cable repair jargon and markups on the ticket, and in the lower left-hand corner, there are initials of who completed the work. They are not legible, and police have spent decades trying to figure out who could have been the owner of the ticket book. The ticket book is generic, without a company listed. Here's OSBI Director Stan Florence speaking at that press conference in 2015.
We want help in identifying those three letters, and identifying who that person was that wrote in that book. This is a book that does not have a company name. We have explored many opportunities to try to locate the company, the records, things of that nature.
You do hear that they haven't been able to say with certainty what company the ticket book was associated with, but one person in law enforcement did say to a media outlet that the book was narrowed down to being associated with Southwestern Bell, now known as AT&T. Even though investigators have partnered with phone companies in the area, they could not find a request of a service call to Tracey's address that day. Jeffrey Neilson said he was unaware of any work that needed to be done as well, and nobody has come forward to say they were the person working. Police obviously have their suspicions that this cable worker may have been involved. At the same time, it's possible he was just there that day to do work and is nervous to come forward because he's worried about being caught up in the case and getting accused. Police are looking for people who may recognize those initials. I'll have a photo of it on the Instagram. If you worked for a telephone company in the area, or you were married to someone who did, or friends with someone who did, and you recognize those initials or that handwriting, you could be the key to breaking this case. In the summer of 2015, police held another press conference on the case. This time, they talked about a keychain that went missing from the apartment and their suspicion that the killer may have taken it as a trophy. The keychain is described as 1 inch wide by 4 inches long and is a tortoiseshell-colored plastic keyring with the name Tracey spelled out on it in capital block letters. Police had a forensic artist recreate a picture of it and released it to the public on this day. I'll have a picture of it on the Instagram. At this press conference, Dr. Jeffrey Neilson spoke and urged the public to come forward. He had gone on to finish medical school and become a successful orthopedic surgeon. And even though he carried on with his life, the pain in his voice was still palpable all these years later.
With Tracey's death, there's a huge emotional burden that's placed on the family, the extended family, and everyone that her life touched. I really think that in all likelihood, this is a random event. The only thing that goes against that is the ravaged nature of the crime.
OSBI Director Stan Florence shared in the same news conference why they feel the keychain holds significance.
In our experience, killers sometimes will take items of evidence or personal belongings from their victims, so we believe that the killer very likely took this key ring and also may very well still have it.
So if you think you may have seen this keychain, or after listening to this you come across something that matches this description, don't write it off. Again, this is another random piece of the puzzle that could be the difference in solving the crime. So what happened to Tracey Neilson on her birthday in 1981? Did someone see her out shopping and followed her home, using some sort of ruse to get into the home or come into an unlocked door? Had someone been stalking her? Was it somebody who lived right in her apartment complex? Did her jealous sorority friend lash out? Was it the cable worker? And was that cable ticket book even real and associated with a real worker? Or just a way a predator gained entry into a home the same way that police impersonators use a fake badge and lights? Investigators and Tracey's loved ones believe that someone knows something. It has been 10 long years since there have been any new leads in the case, but those who love her are desperate for answers. Her father Jim died in the summer of 2015, just as police were releasing the new evidence and trying to gather more information. He was 81 years old. Buried nearby Jim is Tracey. Her headstone is inscribed with the following: "I will miss the year-long spring of her." What a beautiful way to describe someone who brought such beauty, peace, and light to people's lives. Speaking at the 2015 press conference, here was her sister Cindy's plea for the killer to come forward.
I truly feel that whoever it was would feel almost a sense of relief maybe to come and to finally admit it to us. Because we are Christians and we can forgive. So I'm begging you, please come forward. Please just do the right thing, because it's time. It's time to do the right thing. And it's time for us to finally be set free from the agony of not knowing. So I just ask that if anybody knows anything, or if you did it, if you would just please come forward. Please help us.
If you have any information on the unsolved murder of Tracey Diane Neilson, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation asks that you call 800-522-8017 or write to tips@osbi.ok.gov with any information you may have. This has been another episode of A Simpler Time True Crime. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, please spread the word and help others tune in to hear about these cold cases. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, and case suggestions can be made to simplertimeCrimepod@gmail.com. As always, thank you so much for listening, and join me next Monday for another cold case.